Welcome, my sisters, to Black Women Talking Back podcast. I am Dr. Elise Moore Orby, your host. Today, we will be discussing how Black African feminism is imagining a more liberatory world with the brilliant and beautiful Jessica Horn. Jessica Horn is a feminist thinker and builder. She is also a feminist practitioner and writer with over 2 decades of engagement around body politics, futures, and cultivating just social imaginations. Jessica's experience spans across women's health rights and sexual and reproductive rights movements. Jessica pioneered the Futures Initiative at the African Women's Development Fund. She was the first African Black woman appointed to lead the Ford Foundation's East Africa office. She was also the first coordinator of the African Partnership for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, and she also served as a commissioner on the Lancet Commission on Gender and Global Health. Welcome, Jessica, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for this generous invitation.
Thank you. So before we jump into the really deep conversation, which I think probably after reading so much of your work, I think I will probably be on this podcast just with my mouth open, but I'm going to try to I'm going to try to participate in the conversation as well. But you've just done such amazing work. I am just astounded, impressed, and grateful for all the work that you've done. But before we get to the deep conversation, I want to ask you a personal question. So, when you're not out working to transform the lives and experience of women, and you're at home with the heels off and your braids tied up, who are you and what is most important?
I love that question. You know, it's funny, I'm kind of the same person.
I knew you would say that.
Yeah, I'm the same person. I mean, for me, this work is a work of life because it's the work of like enlarging the possibility for everybody to thrive. And, I guess I just have this really strong desire in me to just be with beauty and to share love. That's and so I love that's so I mean I love being in beautiful green spaces. I'll be the first person to want to have a picnic or go for a walk or have flowers. I love to make things. Both of my parents can actually do a lot of things with their hands. I used to make jewelry a lot and just for pleasure, like just I like to make things. And music is actually central to my life, I realize, I wake up, a particular song is in my mind. Music for me is critical. I love to listen to it. I don't make music, but I'm around that. And then I love people, I have a child and a partner. I love to host and have people around. We eat, we share beautiful food. Like yeah. So for me, it's about manifesting the world that like I would fight for, if you want to use those terms. For me, I just feel like in every moment we have to just try and manifest the way we want to live, and that's me. I love, yeah, just feeling that the blessing of life, and the blessing of creation and creativity, and also the blessing of beauty.
Oh my goodness. I as you started to talk about beauty and music and creativity, my whole body just began to relax in the chair. I could
Mm,
feel the energy,
mm,
the the softness. I
mm.
could feel it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. It is very often the work is so hard and calloused. Um, that we lose touch with the things, we lose touch with what is beautiful and beauty itself and softness, especially in personal relationships. I've just over my many years in social justice, um, I've just watched even myself at different times in my life where I realized I had forgotten to take time to look at all the beautiful flowers in my yard, even though I planted them. That I didn't
Yeah.
take time to sit out and spend times with the tulips the bulbs that I planted in the fall, how beautiful they are and smell, in the summer, in the spring. And yeah, and so yeah, I as listen when I was listening to you, I just felt the true softness um in your story, in the reality of your life. And so I'm grateful for that. And I hope that just in this quick minute, our listeners, especially women in social justice work, felt that softness too and reminded them that beauty and creativity is absolutely essential to our lives.
No, it is. And like I said, that is the activism is in search of enlarging that and making sure that that's something that is present in everybody's lives, you know, in the simplest understanding of it. That's what it's about, right? Making sure that everybody can access that and everybody has the space and time and resources and capacity for that, for gentleness, right? The spaces of beauty.
Yes.
Because inequality is violent, it's ugly. You
Yes.
know, it limits, it constrains, it reduces space, it takes away everything beautiful. One of the things, you know, I grew up in what we call the global majority world, but
Mhm.
I remember the first time that I went to um, New York as an adult, and I was studying at university, and I had gone to do a project about museums, actually. So I had gone to El Museo del Barrio in East Harlem, and I remember just walking that museum mile from East Harlem down until I got to one of the big museums. And I was like, oh, I get it. Inequality manifests in space.
Mm.
So you're in a poor neighborhood in New York, there's no space.
Mhm.
Everybody is crammed together. There's no vista, there's no view, there's no sky, there's no kind of open area, there's no space to breathe. And then you walk blocks and you get into richer and richer and richer areas. And then suddenly you're standing in a museum, which, you know, I would think I was like on a mezzanine level looking down. And there was just this great expanse of space and light and air. And it really, I felt it in my body. I was like, this is what injustice is, you know? And so I really feel, like I said, that the activist work is about enlarging the space and, you know, ensuring that everybody has the light and the air and a view, you know, the capacity to have a view, to be able to look out onto your life, your existence, your community, your desires, your dreams, and feel like they're possible.
Yes. Yes. And to be able to even begin with just imagining that
Mhm. Yeah.
is just so critical. Some of our communities have just been so devastated for so long. I think after just generations, people have they even lost their ability to imagine spaciousness, beauty, creativity, a better life. Now, I know what I'm saying is people have lost hope, but that's the reality. Is so many neighborhoods I was just visiting some last week, and it's so obvious that people have lost hope. And so that's why it starts with, if you kill the imagination, if I can no longer imagine beauty, life, creativity, love, kindness, then it's very hard to try to live that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember way back, oh, must have been my daughter's 26, so must have been about 20 years ago, down in Southern California, where several interviews were taking place of young Black men who were involved in some type of gang activity or drug distribution. And out of so many of those interviews, there were so many young men that said basically the same thing, which was they didn't expect to live past 25. They weren't worried about the future because they didn't think they had a future. And sometimes, and as I ride through the Bay Area here, and I especially here in Oakland, and I ride through some of the neighborhoods feel like the neighborhoods are saying, we've lost hope. We don't expect to live that long. And so we've even stopped trying. We don't imagine it. We don't imagine it because it hurts to imagine it. But we don't fight for it anymore because who has the energy and ability to do that? It's just for me, it's just devastating. I think it's we had talked about earlier, sometimes I live between these two worlds. It's one world of faith where hope is alive and all of that. And then the other part of the world, my world, where there's nothing but violence, physical violence, financial violence, emotional violence, economic violence, just so much violence.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the structure of the world. I mean, I know there's a question about like why feminism, right? And to me, um, you know, I don't know. I feel like I was born with an eye that could see injustice and didn't like it.
Mhm.
And there are some of these structuring relationships of the world as it stands now, which are deeply unfair and unjust. And the racisms that you describe are one of the structuring, power dynamics of the world because of what was done, to Black people um, in order to create the modern world as we know it, right? In order to generate the capital, to build the cities, and to create, countries like the United States of America, like, to reinforce the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, all of these places that basically were fueled their industrial revolutions and their wealth was fueled by the extraction from the African continent. And, the revelation too is that that was not just race. All of that was also very much about gender and the imposition of, and in a deep, structuring inequality that meant that women, were oppressed in that system too in different ways. Um, and I think that's the thing, people will say, oh, you guys are just always going on about stuff. The world isn't that bad. But as you say yourself, if you spend time in the lives of people, you can see how that structural inequality, that structural violence ultimately translates into violence in individual lives. You know, the statistic globally is that 1 in 4 women at minimum will experience physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner at some point in their lives. 1 in 4.
Yeah.
And that number goes up if there's any other axis of oppression. So if the woman lives with a disability, if the woman is living in an environment that itself is violent anyway, then you're exposed to other kinds of violence. And that's just only from partners, right? That's not talking about other actors. And so, I think that is the reality and it's normalized. And so, we've kind of come to metabolize it and feel like that's just the way things are, but it doesn't need to be that way. And so I love, that you're pointing out the fact that for many people, um, short-termism is the only way to survive, right? Because you feel like you don't have um a future. You don't have a life anyway, so whatever. You know what I mean? Like let's just um have fun and, um do the maximum, and
Take,
whatever, because you're gonna die anyway.
yeah,
And
take a chance,
that
roll the dice.
exactly, and that to me is a structuring, is an emotion that is structured by oppression, you know? And so, that's in a way one of the reasons why I started to lean into to work around futures, because I'm like, but we also have a right to a future.
Right.
And we have a right to shape also the conversation around, what could futures be, how do we, the future does not have to be oppressive, so how do we intervene then to make sure that it isn't and to enlarge the time scale of people's lives so that people feel like, they have a sense of future. So I mean, I think all these things are all interrelated. And again, we see up close a personal in our lives and the lives of the communities we work in or communities we're in solidarity with. Um, this thing of feeling like time is shortened, and opportunity is reduced, and as you're saying, the imagination is constrained. And to me, that is the work. The work of activism is about shifting power so that time is elongated, right? That
Mhm.
people have that opportunity is expanded, and that there's just this sense of open imagination, that like people can go out into the world and just laugh and feel like there's beauty and opportunity and ideas, and they can manifest their dreams, and that is a state of equality, right? That is what equality is.
So then tell me, Jessica and our listeners, because I don't want us to take anything for granted. When you speak, I'm from the tradition of I'm consider myself a womanist. Um, but I my education was in the world of theology, so had great womanist theologians to build my framework and I want to say even sharpen my edges. um, but I think that over the decades here in America, and I would say even in Europe, feminism has been defined and redefined and controlled by white theorists. And when I listen to you, I'm like, "Ooh, she's a womanist." When I listen to you, you sound very, very different. And so tell us, um, what is a feminist to you? Um, and how did you become a feminist? What decisions did you make? How did you get on that road? And where did the yes come in? And why did the yes? Why was there a yes and not a no?
Mm. So, I mean, to me, feminism, I come out of a tradition of African feminisms, and we say African because we operate in a Pan-African vision. So, this is feminisms and ideas that have been built from, feminist thinking and work from all across the African continent and in conversation with its diasporas. And so when we say African intentionally, we know that Africa is not a country, it's a continent. It's of great diversity, but we understand at the same time a lot of the struggles to be joined. And we also have a transnational vision of what our work is. So if I situate myself in that tradition of thinking, it's really just pointing out the fact that the world is deeply unequal, right? And that inequality and that deep injustice, that imbalance of power is structured along gendered lines, but also in conversation with all of the other oppressions.
Mhm.
Because as we know, the African continent is in the predicament it is because of colonization.
Yes.
And it was European colonization that also came with a deep anti-Blackness and basically constructed racism to justify its economic extraction, right? How else could you come into people's territory and take everything, take their bodies, take their minerals, take their labor, and justify that as being something that was good and okay? And so racism was invented to help justify that, to say these people are maybe not even human, certainly lesser, and we have a right to their stuff. We have a right to their stuff. We have a right to their bodies. We have a right to their labor. We have a right to their things. And also then they didn't know anything before, right? They had no knowledge. They had no connection to God. They had, and we've given them all of this, right? Our great gift is to give them all of this. And so we acknowledge that all of that is a lie, in simple terms, and that all of that was done as a way to justify the extraction. And so African feminisms are always about a transformation of gender power relations. And historically, that has meant rebalancing the power between men and women, but also African feminisms are alive to all the other things, right? So the question of gender non-conforming people, trans, and all of that, which is the English words we use now, but are part of that conversation too, in terms of how people are working with this. And that ultimately the work is to come into balanced relationship, right? And to redistribute power so that every human is able to thrive in society, and that society is not structured by this unequal power relations, right? That we're structured by power relations that liberate, that offer us freedom. So, I mean, that's like in a way, I guess, the thinking or the theory behind it. But interestingly, I mean, like I said, I was born with eyes that kind of saw injustice or saw oppression, and a heart that didn't like it, and hands that wanted to do something about it, right? And so I've just sort of have that inclination. I come from a family background where both of my parents are very, concerned about the world and involved in thinking about what we could do to change that. But in my kind of discovery and reading my as a young woman, a lot of that actually began with African American women's writing. So somebody like Alice Walker, June Jordan, Ntozake Shange, I love poetry, the Sonia Sanchez and of the world, meant a lot to me in terms of also my revelation about what, women's lives were and what this work was. When it comes to the word feminism and whether to use that or another term, I always say, in a way, feminism is just a word in English, Like, I mean, for me, it's like, what is the intention behind it? What are you
Right.
trying to do? You could call it anything. I mean, there are a
Yeah.
lot of people you meet who don't necessarily want to use that term, but whose work is about this work of transformation, and shifting power. So for me, I'm like, whatever word makes sense for you in your environment, I completely understand why there's that tradition of black women's thought that wanted to claim a different, set of terms because the other one was occupied so heavily by people who kept refusing, to acknowledge race and all of the other concerns as a dynamic, who had already defined what it looked like and weren't willing to be in a conversation to expand the space. So I completely understand using another term to help build out your own space. I completely understand that. I'm in support of it, whatever is needed. Um, but to me also what matters then is what we do with it, and is what we do, the thing that helps to produce a different way, to help to change power relations and to produce, an environment where people can thrive. I've always been, I feel like I've always been a part of it, but I actively searched, because those days it was, I mean, this is like, I'm ancient, jokes, I don't know, 46, but when I was coming up, like in my 20s, for example, when I was in university, there was just the early days of the internet, and access to information was still through books and magazines and things like that. And so it was hard to find information on African feminisms, and I really, really searched. And so then I searched to find African feminist community. And so, so much of what I've come to understand is by the people who actually have built this movement and built the thinking, and being in direct community with them. And, and in awe also of the kinds of things that they've done, to intervene and to try to make change.
Yes. Yes. And it's so, you're so right about the just words. It's what's the intent behind it. Um, and I think that I hope a lot of people hear this podcast, a lot of Black women hear this podcast because um, listening to you again, if we use those words that just really put us in a box, again, I would say, oh my goodness, she sounds like a womanist. She sounds she sounds like a womanist. But again, it's not the word, it's not the title, but it's what you spent your life doing, whether through theory, or, implementation. The work that you've been doing has been the work that, just as you say, pushes for, I don't wanna say fight for, but certainly pushes for, as you said so very well, the balancing of power relationships in a way in which the balance creates more opportunity and creates more freedom. And that is exactly, I think that's exactly what the women's movement has always been about. I think at some level the feminist movement was as well. I think just simply because it started with middle class white women, it just looked very, very differently. The power relationships looked very different, and so trying to establish um, strategies, trying to create strategies that went beyond gender gender oppression, and that also addressed all the other oppressions that we've been talking about. It was just so slow in coming. But I do want to say, I do want to say that because I want to believe that even American European feminists, at the end of the day, wanted the same thing. They really were looking to make a shift um, in power and bring a better balance that created freedom for everybody. So maybe they never really got there, but I think to your point, I think I do believe that that was their intention um, from the beginning. Um,
But I mean, I would say like if the in a North American environment, the feminist tradition has ignored race and also class,
yeah.
and some of these other questions, then I would situate my synergy with the womanist movement. You know what I mean? So it's like in terms of the direction. Because I really do think too that if you commit yourself to being a part of a movement that is about reorganizing power relations towards freedom, right?
Mhm.
You also commit yourself to then being humble about
Mhm.
understanding, what that means.
Mhm.
So, and I think that that's the problem is that there's been a deep lack of humility.
Yes.
Like, it's not just about you,
Yeah.
So if it's not just about, oh, girl boss, and it's about me leaning into my corporate job. And I'm like, for some sisters, the question is, do I even have a job?
Right. Right.
Let alone am I in the C-suite? And so
Mhm.
for me, I'm like, that is a fundamental flaw in solidarity.
Yeah.
And so, because for me, it's a thing of like, well, and that's one of the things I've appreciated about African feminisms and my lived experience of that movement is that people are actually really attentive. It's like, people will be like, hey, what about sisters with disabilities? Like, what about us? Like, there's no provision. You guys are organizing meetings and, there's no provision for us to be included. We need our interpreters for sign language. We need ways to enter. We need spaces for rest. Um, the community of women living with HIV, it's just like, look, this is what our struggles are, this is what they look like, and so to me, I just feel like same with like the queer movements and people are just like, hey, you got to question your own discriminations, so that we because you say you're about all of us, so how do we fit into this space? And so there always needs to be a deep humility to just understand that the ways that oppression works are so multiple and so vast, and that we just need to keep paying attention. In the continent, we also have an issue of language, because people come from, it's like multilingual, and so much of the spaces are dominated by English. And that means that places are really inaccessible. I remember in one of the African feminist forums in Senegal, those are the spaces that we created that brought together feminists from all over the continent. There was a strand of work that was around like environmentalism and understanding kind of like ways that people are adapting and dealing with climate. And so there was a sister from a community, I feel like it was in Benin, and but she only spoke her language. She actually didn't speak French. Well, she spoke many languages, but French wasn't one of them.
Mhm.
But she was this incredible engineer and had, they were making like these solar cells and using them to then power like the things that they needed, to do the agriculture. And so she had come and she was like demonstrating how to hook up this solar cell. It was quite amazing. And because I'm like not an engineer, so I was amazed. And So she was speaking in a language, someone was translating into French, and then someone else was translating into English or Portuguese for the people that spoke it, right? So it's like we work across many languages too. We need to keep paying attention to all of that. So that's what I mean. Like if there's a movement that says it's about freedom and transformation and it's not humble, you know, that it's not attentive, to the ways it excludes, then it's not really about the full freedom,
Yes.
and so the work has to be to always just be like, hey, I'm just paying attention and always thinking about ways to keep being more and more and more and more inclusive to ensure that the space is available for more and more and more and more people from more and more and more positionalities. If we want this thing to be about the world, then we have to invite the world in and adjust ourselves to make sure that the world has space and voice and platform and is able to do what it needs to do in the spaces we create.
So you've brought up an issue for me that I had not planned to talk about on the podcast, but I'm like, I have Jessica. Why not ask her about it now? Um, One of the things that about social justice movements is, and I'm not saying this is correct, but this is just what I see, and that's why it worries me. Um, is that it seems that the in the inroad is not freedom, but is equal access and ability and opportunity to, and I'm just going to have to use the word, to be a part of a capitalistic society, to be a greater part of a capitalistic society. Sometimes it feels like to me that the push is not for freedom, but having the right access, having fair access to live like others. I'm
Hmm.
just gonna say, to live like white middle class America.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think I remember Aikweama, who's a writer, Pan-Africanist writer. I remember him talking about this veneration of kings and queens, and I should say that actually, even in my mother's lineage, I come from a monarchy. But he was talking about veneration of kings and queens, and he was saying that the problem with kings and queens, like it's nice as a kind of image, I suppose, of feeling, affirmed. But the problem with kings and queens is that it presumes that they're slaves,
Mhm.
right? Because how do you have a kingdom without
Right,
servants, right?
right.
And usually some level of indentured or enslaved people.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the systemic analysis of what you're saying. So if you have an economic system or a political system where possibility is basically based on some people needing to be oppressed or treated badly in order for others to thrive, then yes, that can never be, in the end, a system that produces equality for everybody. And, it's interesting because there's this awkwardness around conversations around capitalism. But I think a lot of people don't understand that from a Black diasporic perspective. So, for example, from an African American perspective, but also from the African continent, one of the reasons why the liberation movements tended towards like an anti-capitalist analysis or a
Mhm.
leftist analysis was just because the reason why we were in the predicament, like we ended up in the predicament, right? The reason why Black people ended up enslaved, Africans ended up enslaved in the United States of America and the Caribbean. Why the African continent, is still in this ridiculous position of basically having most of the wealth of the world in its soil and in its mines and in its hands, and yet being at the absolute bottom rung of the global economy is because we were needed to fuel the success of others, right? And I
Right.
spoke at the beginning about racial capitalism, that actually the reason, the continent was conquered for money, right? To fuel industrialism and to fuel other people's wealth. And the way that that was justified was by saying that we were lesser. And so racism is basically in a direct relationship with capital accumulation.
Right.
And that's just history. That's not an ideological analysis. That's literally just history. It is the reality of history. And like I said, I think, there's still a lot of kind of pushback around, this question of why is it that Black people have this anti-capitalist and Black radicals or Black freedom thinkers? But it's just that. It just comes out of the history. It's like, well, if something is the ultimate source of your oppression, why would you not have a critique of it?
Right.
So yes, I mean, I think what's difficult is that basically along the way, people still, like delayed gratification or delayed freedom is frustrating. So like how many generations do you have to wait until there's a redistribution of resources? Everybody wants nice things. Everybody wants to also be in an environment where they feel like they have agency and choice, and money gives you that, right? And so I also completely understand the desire to live a good life and to have opportunities in your hands and material benefit in your hands. I think that's fair, you know, and we critique it heavily, but I think it's fair. Yeah, that's the point, right? That's the end goal of the freedoms, is to be able to, to be happy, and to have the things you want for you and your family and your community. So I also have empathy with that too. And I feel like we just need to also figure out what's the point in between. Like, how do we do the work of redistributing now so that people also do have, the services and protections and opportunities they need while as we're working on the transformation. There has thus far been I mean, it's been difficult because obviously the people who benefit from the system as is, who benefit from the extreme inequality, do not want that benefit to go away. And so they have always fought tooth and nail to make sure that whomever points it out, or whomever tries to change it, doesn't succeed.
Hmm.
Doesn't succeed.
Tell me
And
how, tell me
yeah,
how, just go back to your point. You talked about, there is this conversation, I want to say a lightweight conversation going around the world around capitalism, critiquing capitalism. But what I'm not hearing is the conversation about how do we change that and what do we change it to? So what do we replace that with? And I guess
yeah,
and that goes back for me, it connects to the other point, which is some of our social justice movements are about getting to a place where we can have so that we can be middle class America or middle class Europe too. But to your point, there can be no middle class without the poor class.
mhm.
It just cannot be unless we shift to something totally different. So tell me about what's the conversations happening in Africa around alternatives to capitalism?
Yeah. I mean, I should say that this conversation is not really happening at a government level very much. So
Oh,
this is really something that's, it was in the liberation movements and around
mhm,
independence, but as we know, the 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 architects of those conversations were pushed out, assassinated,
mhm,
to be honest. And again, like I said, this is history. I'm not making this up, and I'm not even being ideological. This is just fact.
mhm,
And so, those conversations, I think, at a nation state level are pretty minimal, but there are a lot of very interesting, well, movements and also economic thinkers who are really just saying, hey, like where we are at now hasn't, I mean, there is quote unquote an expanding middle class if you look at how it's framed, which is also in the definition of middle class in Africa, is laughable. It's the amount of money they calculate as constituting middle class is laughable. Just knowing, how expensive actually many African cities are and what it takes and also the fact that, much like I think communities, anywhere where people live in a kin-based setup, where you have like multiple generations and you're
mhm,
responsible for people,
mhm,
the black tax, like people actually are almost like their own mini social security systems, and the one person that's working and earning a salary actually has to support the school fees, the healthcare, the whatever of like an entire community. And so, but so there is a conversation there, and some of it is very exciting. I mean, I think what's difficult, like I said, is the ideological thing. So it's like, how do you want to frame it?
Hmm.
A lot of the old guard visions of what a different system would look like were about the government or the state, owning industries and running things and redistributing. But I think a lot of Africans have minimal faith now in their states and their nation states.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversation almost about ground up approaches. So things like solidarity economies, mutual aid, which is where people, put money into a pot, for example, and or put resources and other skills and then share them, in response to what people need. There's a lot of more like local community efforts to figure out how do you, create systems that look different.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing to is an area that really needs our deep attention, because I think it's become a muted area of our thinking and activism. People feel it in their lives because again, the economic security is really ephemeral, like um it really just up and down.
Hmm.
Like nothing is really that assured. And I feel like the world right now is so deeply unequal on in economic terms. And people are really stressed, you know. So there's a lot of work there to really question. There's labor organizing, like the way that Amazon was organizing in the States, Amazon workers on the continent is content moderators. Because as we know, like the big, growth of industry in the States and Europe is, social media and artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
But of course, those industries require their slaves,
Right.
right? To use just to look at it metaphorically. And so, who's doing the work of cleaning the data?
Hmm.
Who's doing the work of building out, the back end? It's young Africans.
Hmm.
And people are in like, gig economy jobs, earning very little money, doing work that traumatizes them because they're sitting there day in, day out, obliged to watch horrendous content of violence and abuse and murder and all kinds of things and label it for the AI, and getting traumatized, getting PTSD, not having options. There's actually a case at the moment in the Kenyan High Court that's being brought actually by a young woman lawyer, representing the content moderators who are doing this work for Meta and OpenAI, who were then sacked, for raising the questions around how the companies are basically how they were responsible for their mental health too. Um, they've also formed an African Content Moderators Union where they're trying to organize for their labor too. So like I said, there's moments of interesting things happening, but yeah, I think we need to have resuscitate the vision again, of collectively what does this look like and how do we do it? And it's a new era, I think young people are the materialism, right? And the kind of desire for the material, I feel like is exponentially exploded. You know, I think, and it's in the social media, and I think one of the places that we really need to pay attention to it is in the popular culture, because popular culture shapes desire. And I feel like, you know, the way that industries, like culture industries, um, have come in to help shape some of the ground up popular culture used to have a critique of that. And now it's just all about the material, you know? And it's interesting because African American culture, of course, is powerful, and spreads far. And unfortunately, that piece of that kind of materialist desire that became, kind of the only thing Black people were able to say in commercial, right?
Right.
In commercial popular culture, it became the only thing the execs wanted to hear, has spread really far. And you see it being echoed in a lot of African popular culture, for example.
Mm.
So I feel like we also need to do the work there,
Hmm.
of transforming kind of the vision and imagination and desires and spreading the cultures that say different things, and finding ways for that to spread is kind of a symbol of our collective, like what we're trying to do with our lives.
It's amazing. Our struggles are so similar. Our struggles are so similar. our realities are so similar. Um, but also in listening to you imagine new and different and better approaches, strategies, the responses also, the way in which we begin to think about making change is also the same. And I wonder, um, you know, how do we, or could we, first of all, could we, and if we could, you know, how do how do we come together? Talking about humility, how do we come together, recognizing that we have some of the same challenges, mostly the same challenges, just in a different context, um, but also some of the responses, the solutions are also the same. How could we come together for those conversations and try to work together strategically to to address our issues and bring about change?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because we're in an era where there's more ability to travel and communicate and share than ever.
Hmm.
But I actually feel like we're more divided across geography than,
Yeah.
say, the era of the 60s and 70s. I mean, if you
Yes.
think about it, those guys were, I have she passed now, but one of my brother's mentors, her name was Abba Cecile Makadi, and she was a Jamaican woman who, older generation, and she had, gone from Jamaica to the UK to study, then ended up kind of eventually as Kwame Nkrumah's PA. She traveled, across the Sahara in a little car. She's very adventurous, and but I saw, and then eventually she became a Buddhist Lama. But she had these amazing pictures of her in Accra with Malcolm X and all these people. I mean, it's like those were the times when people were really traveling in genuine interest and solidarity with each other's struggles and, and in conversation. And, again, think about what it took to travel then and now, it's so much easier and we can even travel, like I said, through, the social media, through the telephone communications. It's so much easier now. But what I noticed too, because like just spending time online, what I noticed too is that I feel like there's a intentional effort to try to break apart Black unity. So I see all of this conversation about the difference between, African descendants of slaves and, Africans on the continent and whatever. And I'm like, guys, I'm sorry, but this is clearly a tactic, to break us apart.
Hmm.
Like killing, you
Yeah.
know? And we can't allow that. We cannot allow that. We cannot afford it. We cannot afford it
Right.
because that same oppressor is the same oppressor.
That's right.
We cannot afford it. So I feel like even this conversation that we're having here is important, and we just need to really be creative about continuing to make the bridges. There is this really beautiful very strong movement across Latin America, Colombia, Brazil, Afro-descendant movements, the Caribbean. And I just feel like we have to just keep intentionally figuring out ways to meet each other, to know each other, to, read each other's thinking, to listen to each other's music, to understand each other's struggles, to be in solidarity with each other and build that conversation. Um, and I think it just takes committing to it first. And when you commit to it, then you figure out the resources around it. You figure out how you can make that happen.
Hmm.
Um, you figure out how to bridge the language divides and all of that. But like you can do it. So to me, I think that's an opportunity. But like I said, everything takes intention. And so we just have to be intentional about it
Hmm.
you know um and I think for those of us who also have bridges, like who travel or who come from the different worlds or have friends and connections and movement connections or personal friends in the different worlds, we also have to be intentional about finding ways to share the resources, and like I said, things travel through different means. Like I think the popular culture, the music, the poetry, the fiction writing, all of that are ways to connect us. And that's actually how people were connected in previous generations as well. And then you have the activism which comes with that as well. And that, can be another point of connection. But we do have to re-embrace a Pan-Africanist vision, and not allow, that discourse to divide us. Because like I said, that to me is a little fishy. I'm just like, wait a minute, like why are we fighting each other? Like guys,
Right.
we are not
Or
each other.
ignoring each other.
Ignoring each other, that to me is a little, it's a little bit of a red flag. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was actually this is actually the reason I started the podcast. It's my dream, my goal is to listen to Black women all across the world, different countries, contexts, et cetera, cultures, et cetera, share their life story and how they are bringing about change, how they are working towards freedom in their families, in their communities, that we might all learn from each other. Um, I felt like we were divided, divided by continents, divided by language, um, divided by political beliefs, spiritual beliefs, all of that. I felt like, oh, they just chopped us up into little pieces, and so now we're not only are we not whole, but we're ignorant. And so we're trying to make the world a better place on our own, in our own little bubble, when we have such rich wisdom and creativity, strategies and approaches, thinking, theories, when we all get together. And so
Mhm.
I started this podcast for that very reason that it's my hope that I can have women all over the world on the podcast sharing their stories and their work, that we might learn from each other and that we might learn that we're not alone, and eventually begin to build a community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also love the way when we, like we have the space and time to also just explore how we're similar and how we connect and also how we're different and just understand that. But we almost never have the space to just do that. That's
Right.
not pressured. I remember some years back, the Association for Women's Rights and Development, it's like a international non-governmental organization, non-profit, that brings together, feminist activists from all over the world or people working on women's rights. And at that time, it was led by Black women, and so they have this big forum that brings together like, the largest number of women's rights activists outside of any UN meeting or whatever. And so they decided to create the first Black feminist forum within it. And so they had like this pre-forum, which was bringing together Black feminists from all over the world. I mean, like literally every global continent, every continent. And I was one of the co-facilitators of it with Awa Fall Diop, who's an older generation, incredible Senegalese activist and former government minister and all the rest, cultural activist too. And it was a beautiful thing. But what was also very interesting is that it was in Bahia in Brazil. And so we were in this because, when you have to hold that many people where you go to stay, everyone needed to be in the same physical place. So we ended up in a resort.
Mm,
Now, of course, in Brazil, with the race class dynamics, reserved
right.
for white people,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
all the stuff are black, right?
Mhm. Right.
But there we were. It was how many of us? I think maybe like 200 or so from everywhere, from the Colombians, everywhere, like black, Spanish, everyone, yeah. And so the staff were like, hey, this is amazing. So the staff in the hotel, so like we were in the number one, we were in this hotel and they pulled out all the Afro-Brazilian food. So all the like West Africans are like, okay, you guys are eating akara and like supu kanji, which is like the Senegalese dish, which is like, seafood with, palm oil, stew. It's like, okay, this is interesting. The food is the same. And
Yes.
then the waiters and waitresses and the people working were just like, they come to our tables and then they'd look and they'd be like, huh. And like, we also have those things in Brazil.
Mhm.
Like it was so fascinating. It was like this really beautiful encounter. They had never seen, so many Black people in the hotel, number one, but also people
Mhm.
from all these places. And again, just the synergies and the resonances. And it's just a funny example, right? But like it was interesting. And I was like, well, we need some space and time to be together. And then they had this one evening event, which was basically like It was like a sound battle between a DJ, Lene Denise, who's African American, but is kind of like mainly a house DJ, but like explores musics from all over the Black world.
Mhm.
And this all-women samba drumming group. Oh my gosh. Like
Yes.
it was a next level situation. And that's what I mean. I'm like, there's so many things that are similar to us,
Yes.
between like the rhythmic space and the spiritual dimension of who we are when we're together, and the aesthetics and the food and the culture. And those are the things that also, when we come together, we see how similar we are. And we also understand the reason for our solidarity. It's not, just the objective things of our histories and everything, but literally we understand that we're kin. Like we
Mhm.
literally are brothers and sisters and friends and siblings, right? Like there's no denying. And that also together we're so quickly able to create these spaces of just absolute joy and transcendence,
Yes.
and it's this capacity we have, which to me is the creation of these almost like liberated zones, like in that like sound battle, it's like they literally created this liberated zone that was just like a third space, with
Yes.
beats from the samba and the beats from the DJ and the dancing. It was just like another world,
My
and
goodness,
so that's that.
I'm wishing I was there. I'm wishing I was.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, vibes, so like, so I feel like, these are the things, and this is my wish for us too, is that if we keep being imaginative, we can keep creating such things, because there are resources in this world, actually. And we also in our organizing create spaces. So we just have to have the imagination to keep doing that, right? To keep manifesting this like Pan-African feminist imagination where we want to make those spaces, we want to understand each other and connect in those ways. And, every movement is about relationship, you know, you feel each other's breath, you feel each other's flesh, you're together, every movement is about relationship. So we have stronger friendships with each other. And that's the basis of the solidarity.
Oh, I feel so much better. Mm, Um, I often pray, um, and ask that I can imagine that which I am not capable of imagining. So imagining something that I have not seen before, have not heard before, something totally different, new and new. Um, and I believe that our minds, my mind, has the capacity to do that because everything we have on this earth wasn't here, until we imagined it and created it. So um,
Mhm, mhm,
quite frequently I asked if somehow my mind could imagine something completely new that has not been imagined before that would bring our people together in relationship, not as the activist or the advocate, but just as people, as siblings, as kindred, that whatever those things are that keep us separated, would somehow figure out how to dismantle those, deconstruct those things that separate us, that we might reach out and touch each other and be one.
mhm. Absolutely. And I feel like it's there in Black language and in African language, like people, we always greet each other as kin. We talk about, hey sis, hey fam. Like there's and it's like that in African languages too, like the terms of reference to people are
Mhm.
acknowledging relation. And
Yes.
so I feel like if you, even just in greeting, if that's how you speak to each other, it starts to generate those imaginations, because then you're like, and so what does that mean then if you're my
Right.
kin,
Right.
right? Like, what does that produce in terms of what I would want for you and what I would want for us,
Mhm.
And it begins to expand that sense. And I just also trust in our power. I mean, like I said, it's that generative power, but I also feel like we have to be together. I mean, there is something about coming together, literally. There's something about community and communing. I think, we need time for ourselves, absolutely, but the transformation happens always in community, and it happens in relation to each other because we're trying to build worlds that look different, and those worlds are ultimately relational. They're about you and me and all of us, in relationship to each other in different ways. I firmly believe that we have to actually practice the thing we're trying to create, because if we don't even know what it is. And
Yeah.
it may come and we don't even know what to do with it. And that's all possible. So there was a time I was invited into this initiative. So in Eastern Congo, I think we people now know that story of this horrible war that's just never ending, partly because it's one of the most mineral rich lands in the world. And so obviously where there's minerals that are about money, there's war. And so the net effect, though, is that that's just had a horrendous impact on the lives of the people that come from that place. And so there was some work being done with Panzi Hospital, which is the hospital set up by Dr. Mukwege and his colleagues, who became experts in reconstructing, women's genitals. And women, he's a gynecological surgeon because of the extreme sexual violence that they experience. And they were dealing with just this constant flow of people into the hospital. And then it was taking a massive toll on their own health workers, because it's like, how much devastation in a body can you experience before, you need a break, right?
Mm.
And so they asked for, mental health support for their own staff. They asked to the Stephen Lewis Foundation, who's a Canadian foundation. They were like, can you send, Canadian psychologists, because, they speak French, we speak French. And Stephen Lewis Foundation said, actually, why are we sending Canadians? We should be sending other Africans,
Mhm.
And so we began this initiative that resulted in the creation of this platform, which was really bringing together practitioners from across the continent who work in environments of kind of extreme violence and extreme deprivation, to understand what is trauma actually when you're in an environment of constant structural
Mhm.
upset and structural, what is trauma, and how do we go about, healing it? And one of the things that was very interesting to us is, it was psych people, like trained psychologists and counselors and people doing, documentation and supporting community. But one of the things that struck us is we're like, wait a minute. So we were with like women who are survivors of the Rwandan genocide. We were with these, women from Congo. We was, thinking about work people had done in Liberia and Sierra Leone and Northern Uganda, in the townships in South Africa. And we're like, people don't actually have access to trained psychologists per se in the Western tradition, like a psychologist or a counselor or psychotherapist. But people are kind of managing, like, wait a minute, like what's their secret, you know?
Mhm.
And what we realized is that, when people come together with intention, they come together with the intention to help each other heal. And so much of what they do is about almost manifesting the kind of energy that they want to live in. So people sing and they dance. Rhythm is a healer, and we know that across African descendant communities, Black communities, we know that rhythm is a healer. People sing, they pray, they're in circles, they make circles and they dance together and they sing together and they share rhythm and breath and harmony. They cultivate, so they grow food together and they share it. They harvest it together and they share it. These are like really simple technologies of being human.
Mhm.
And they do that with the full intention to enable each other's lives. And that is how they survive. And so to me, I feel like, and even go to the point of reconstructing their whole sense of self, they regain their faith in life, they're able to kind of, move through unspeakable horrors and get to a space where actually they feel like, they can be with people and, still be in the world and continue. So to me, there's great wisdom in that, right? And
Yes.
again, I feel like it's echoed across, the horrible experiences that we've experienced over history, that people find those ways, you know? Is it Harriet Tubman who has that phrase that's like, children keep going, if you want to taste freedom, keep going, you know? And there's just this thing of, yeah, being able to make these spaces where we're able to keep going together. So I really do believe in this work, we have all the technical stuff we do and then like, the way we, whatever, but at the heart of it is this shared intention around wanting each other to live, and then using these, like I said, these simple technologies that we have access to, of channeling spirit, of producing rhythm, of sharing voice and breath and song, and these circles of connection. And we make them together in any space we can find. And that's the thing that allows us to, resuscitate and to keep going.
Once again, you've softened my whole body. I've relaxed in my chair and I'm in another place, another plane. Um, but I completely agree that the power of healing is in relationship with each other, but I would also add in relationship with self. Like going back to the beginning when I talked about the young men who didn't expect to live very long, and the people who lost hope. And so it's a it's a challenge to bring people together in a way that creates loving environments, healing environments when people have lost their ability to love themselves, their own life. But when I listen to you talking about the survivors in Congo, just my imagination running around, running away with pictures pictures in my mind of these women, and I'm thinking, okay, here are women who really could have lost hope, who could have really been in a place where they believed that they had no future. And yet somehow the coming together brought hope and the possibility of future. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that those technologies create the imaginations for a more just world, a more just life, and a more just world.
Absolutely. And also I think though, like the way that we understand the self. So a lot of the conversation that happens around the self, because we're speaking in English, right? So it's
Mhm.
framed by a lot of a particular tradition of Western psychology, which dominates, which thinks of the self as an individual.
Mhm.
But we're not. I
Right.
mean, for one thing, everybody's born, which means that, you were carried in a body, you were carried in a womb, and you emerged from another body. So like even at that very basic level, like you
Right.
have a connection to other bodies that produce you. And so we're not individuals, in isolated individuals, and the self is always collective in some way.
Mhm.
So you have responsibility for yourself, absolutely, but that self is never not in relationship to others. And I think that that's the piece of the work that we have to just keep thinking about. So we all have I mean, I'm very grateful to my parents and, in particular my mother, who I think practiced the kind of what we call these days revolutionary mothering,
Mhm.
and who was always very affirming. I mean, she came from, I think, also a cultural tradition of like, I think a very gentle, I always say like where she comes from in Western Uganda, like, and certainly in her family, the women have something I guess people would call Reiki. Like they can just touch you
Mhm.
and you're healed. This is like this very gentle touch that channels like kind of balancing energy.
Mhm.
And just she's just very affirming. She was always very affirming. And so, I feel like I had that as at least a ground that enabled me to kind of navigate, and try and find myself and affirm myself. Then the writing that I encountered, I spoke about the African American women's writing that I encountered early, which was also very affirming. And interestingly, Alice Walker in particular, who I think had taken this real interest, right, and had this integration of the spirit too, and kind of affirmed a lot of things as well, and started to build out this universe of just thinking about the self in positive ways, and And then I became part of a feminist movement, where there's so much attention to just, thinking about and processing our own personal lives and what they look like and affirming, people who are making decisions that are against the grain of patriarchy and other expectations, and just affirming, you know, African feminist spaces are really celebratory. And I think other people who come in are like, wow, you guys, like everyone's looking good and they're smiling. And it's just like, but that's just a way of affirming self. People are just affirming themselves, like it's just the adornment and everything is just a way of celebrating yourself. It's simple. It's not about showing off or whatever. It's just people just who are like, yeah, this is me, this is my spirit, this is my culture, this is my what I'm in the mood for today, in whatever expression that is. But like I said, it's always in relation. So, and people form those relationships in different ways. For some people who feel deeply alone, often find a relationship with a spiritual force, for example, right? People may say, oh, I found a relationship with God. I'm like, okay, but that's a relationship, right?
Mhm.
It's the self in relation to another force. For other people, it's a particular friend, or an auntie or a relative or, someone they found in activist community or the whole community who holds you or, whatever it is. A space you go to celebrate or to dance or, to make music or to whatever. Like there's places you go and you find. So the self and the collective exist together. And I feel like that's what creates the imagination. That's just where we have to take care about community. Like community matters a lot. It's what holds us. We just have to take care with it and make sure we nurture it and make sure we give thanks for it and appreciate it. It's often the place where we go then to spill out all of our pain and to take it out on others because it's safe to do so there and you can't
Mhm.
do it with the rest of you know.
Right.
And I'd say anyone who's been in activist community is like, "Ugh," we can also be really difficult with each other and hurt each other a lot. I honestly, if I step way back and look at that, because I've felt that a lot, I have a lot of pain from being wounded in the house of my friend. But at the same time, if you step way back, you're like, yeah, but the only reason people do that there and do it with me is because they feel safe to do so. You
Mhm.
know, they can't take it out on, the other person that actually hurt them. So they're taking it out on me because they feel like they can.
Mhm.
And in a funny way, maybe that's just a statement of the fact that they actually feel safe,
Yes.
in the space enough to do so. So we process all of that, but at the same time, like I said, we just have to keep giving thanks for the and paying attention and protecting it a little bit and making sure that we defend the ability to be together in spaces that are ultimately for our affirmation.
Community. Community and self. One and the same. I love that. I love that. Jessica, it's been wonderful having this conversation with you. Mostly, as I said from the very beginning, I know I'm just going to be sitting here with my mouth hung open in awe of your wisdom and your experience. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You,
Well, thank you.
I literally, I feel like I've had like a massage or some Reiki, that I've had some kind of treatment that has softened my body and my spirit. I feel so at ease as a result of this conversation. Yeah, I feel good. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
Yeah. Yeah, we always have the power to create um little moments of freedom, you know? And I think we just need to just keep remembering that and keep cultivating it. Because those little moments add up, and they re-energize the possibility and they move us in that direction. So it's a real blessing. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really beautiful to meet you. The work you're doing is sacred work, and we really do need to reconnect with each other, and remember our kin around the world, and you know, re be stay connected to each other's stories, in the ways that we can be in solidarity, however small or however big. This is the work. We are the majority of the world. We're literally
Yes.
the majority of the world. And
Yes.
so we just need to remember that and to, kind of unite in that, the true like demographic force, but also with a vision for worlds that look very different. So give thanks. I appreciate this invitation.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am sure that along the way, in the many years that this podcast will run, that I'm going to circle back around to you and find out what you've been doing over the last couple of years in the future, because I know you'll be up to building relationships, and I know you'll be up to building community, and that you will continue to work to build power relationships that work for freedom for everybody, and that's so important. So I'm going to be coming back around to you. Don't forget me.
I can't.
I'll be reaching out again to hear what great things you're doing. Thank you. So I want to say to our listeners, you can visit Jessica Horn on her website. You can go to stillsherises.com, where you can also gain access to the marvelous work that she's doing, both past and present, and as well as her writing. She's got several books and also some publications with Sage Publications. And so I encourage you to go to the website and check her out. You'll be smarter and more inspired as a result of it. Thank you for sharing your time with us tonight, being in community with Black Women Talking Back podcast. If you want to be on the podcast, if you want to share your story, your wisdom, your strategies for change, please email me at blackwomentalkingback@gmail.com. We're lining up panelists all the time. We're going to do some panelists, and we're going to do a lot of individual interviews. So there are a lot of sisters that have written books this last couple of years. I want to interview sisters who are writing their stories, who are telling their stories in book form, those who are doing new research and policy work, just our gamut, the full gamut. So if you're interested in being on the podcast, please email me and let me know. Once again, I love you all. I love you, every single one of you. I love you. Until the next time, don't forget to follow us.